Welcome back to the Courageously Unconventional podcast. Today we have a guest on the show. My guest is Kricia Palmer. She is a physician turned interior designer and certified life coach, and she helps crazy busy women physicians create intentionally designed spaces that make coming home the best part of their day. So there are so many things I loved about our conversation, but one of the things I really love is how open and vulnerable Kricia is about sharing what it was like to switch from medicine to interior design mid-career. She talks to me about feeling unhappy in medicine and being brutally honest with herself and really listening to what she wanted to try next in life. So, even if you're not considering a career change, if what you're considering is a lifestyle change or a change in relationship or something else completely, you'll get a lot from this conversation. And in particular, we talk about paying attention to how you feel and letting that be an invitation to dig deeper and ask questions. Why am I feeling this way? What can I pay attention to here? We also talk about how there's no certainty with anything we do, and we just have to trust our gut and be willing to try and fail and trust that we can always pick ourselves back up again. So enjoy this conversation with Kricia Palmer. All right, welcome back to the Courageously Unconventional podcast. Today, I have a special guest on the show, Kricia Palmer. Kricia, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Lynn. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so we've known each other actually for a few years. I think we met first through Katrina Ubel's program where she was running something for physician life coaches. And at the time, I knew a little bit of your story, but now that I've been doing research, I'm like, dang, there's way more to this than I ever imagined. So that might be a good place to start to talk about how you went from being a physician to now interior designer, life coach combo and how that all worked out.
Sure. Yeah. So growing up, I was a very, if you had asked me what I wanted to be when I was growing up, I would have said a dancer or an actress because I was always a super creative kid. I loved theater. I loved dance. I grew up in dance class. And so all along, really up through early college, that's what I wanted to do. And I actually started college as a dance performance major at Oklahoma City University, which has a great performing arts program. And my goal was to dance in music videos and on Broadway. And I wanted to do all the things. The thing that I was very clear at that time that I knew I didn't want to do was I didn't want to teach. And so once I got into that and realized that, your career path is hard and short-lived, and knowing that I didn't want to teach, I kind of decided to pivot. And I was still 18. I was in, my first year of college. And so I was left with the question, well, what am I going to do now? And so I had a really great high school biology teacher who's very influential. And she always encouraged me, if you want to go to med school, you should go to med school. School always came relatively easy to me and I made good grades. And so when I came to that point where I was like, well, I'm not going to dance. Now what am I going to do? I started thinking about these things that she had told me. And at the time, I just think, first of all, I think it's crazy when we expect 18-year-olds to make
100%.
These decisions. I just think it's absolutely ridiculous. I had no clue. I didn't know anything about medicine. I didn't know what it involved. I didn't know what the lifestyle was like. And at the time I thought, well, what's the hardest thing that I can imagine doing? Because I was always very driven. I was always up for a challenge. And I was like, I'll just be a doctor. So that's what I'm going to do. So I changed my major to biology, pre-med pathway. And that's what I did. And once I got into it, it was I don't regret it at all. But once I got into it, I realized that it was probably not the best fit for me and my personality and my true interest that I'd had since I was a kid. And so I decided to leave medicine after practicing a couple of years. And I stayed at home with our two boys. At the time, I had a toddler and a newborn. And I stayed at home with them and went back and got another undergraduate degree in interior design. And now I have my own business called House Calls for Physicians, where I provide interior design services for other women physicians across the country. And for those who want to learn interior designs to design for themselves, I also have a course that teaches them how to do that.
That's amazing. And I mean, well, there's so much that came up while you were telling your story because I think it's, well, A, brave to like find your own path, like to go through, like to start as a dancer, go into med school and realize that like it was a mismatch for you there.
Mm-hmm.
But like, how did you know that it wasn't, that medicine wasn't a good fit for you?
So at the time, I actually can answer this a lot better now that I'm almost 50 and I have much more awareness of what was going on at the time. At the time, I had no clue what was going on. I just knew I was unhappy. Medical school was great. During residency, I think is when I first noticed, I don't really like this pace. Of course, residency is really hard no matter which one you're in, and things do get a little better once you get into practice. But I'm an introvert, so that constantly having to be on all day and talk to patient after patient was challenging for I think that's just a personality difference. Um, and I missed the creative outlet. I've always been really self-motivated. I like to create. And I know I know that's what it was. I wasn't able to be constantly creating something new, which is what I do in my business now. So I really missed that. At the time, I don't think I had much self-awareness or understanding. I just knew I was unhappy. And I knew that I kind of secretly fantasized about just getting away from it and walking away. But it took me a long time to admit that to myself. And it took me a long time to actually do that because of all of these thoughts that I had about, well, I went through all the training. Now I can't waste it. Or, what will other people think if I leave medicine? So all that came into play.
Well, how did you even work through that though? Because I'm just imagining and maybe
Mm-hmm.
projecting here on like who do you even talk to
Mm-hmm.
about this?
Yeah.
Because it's like it can be probably feel pretty isolating to start having these thoughts, but then still be in the midst of your career.
Yeah, it was. And I had two young kids. My oldest had special needs at the time, so I think it was just overall a very stressful time. And if it were now, like being a coach and having lots of coach friends and my own coach, I could have had plenty of people to talk to about that. But then I didn't. I
Mm.
did talk to my husband about it, but I even limited that just because I was so self-conscious about, my uncertainty and so self-conscious about like feeling guilty for even feeling this way that I wanted to leave medicine. So I didn't really talk to a lot of people. I talked a little bit to my mom, who was a great listener. She's always been supportive. My husband was supportive, but I still don't think that I communicated with him to the degree that he really understood how unhappy I was.
Mm.
I was sort of keeping this facade that everything's okay. So it was really something that I unnecessarily bore on my own. And finally, I remember thinking my main thing was like, everybody's going to think I'm crazy and I'm wasting all of this training. And it got to the point where I thought, you know what, I can't go on like this. Like I have to do what's right for me and I have to be happy. And that's when I just decided I can't do it anymore. And so I made the decision to leave my practice. I was at Arkansas Children's Hospital I had an academic position at the time. And I was unhappy, but it was kind of a combination of things. I was not unhappy. I was unhappy in that career. I really wanted to be at home with my kids because, like I said, I had an older child with special needs, required a lot, and I felt like I was missing out on that. So I wanted to be at home with them, and that was my priority. So my first decision was just to leave medicine and go and be at home with my kids. So once I did that, and I realized that the world didn't fall apart because I left, everything was still going. Then it was actually several years after that, which I decided to sort of act on this dream that I had had, probably since medical school. I think medical school was when I discovered my love for interior design.
Yeah.
And I decided to kind of take another step and actually go back to school to do that. So it was kind of in two stages.
Um, did you know, like at the time, anybody else that was doing anything similar to you at all? Like thinking about leaving medicine, thinking about changing careers?
At the time, the only person that I was sort of aware of, there was a guy in our medical school class who actually went to my high school. He was a little bit younger than me, that finished medical school, ended up not doing a residency, and he went off to become an entrepreneur. Now he's an extremely successful entrepreneur in Northwest Arkansas. But I think that was it. Like no one else. I mean, it's changed so much, in the past 15 years. Now everybody's leaving. It seems like lots of
Yeah.
people are leaving medicine and doing other things. But at the time, they weren't. So I didn't have anybody else that I really felt like I could talk to about it that had been through it, or that would understand. So I
Yeah.
just sort of was like, well, I guess I'm going this alone right now.
You're going it alone, going it first,
Yeah.
really. Because you're right. Like now you can find dozens of stories, like hundreds
Hmm.
of stories about people doing, similar path going into entrepreneurism. But I think, and I just wanted to point that out here is that like there wasn't a precedent for you. It wasn't like,
Hmm.
oh, I'm going to go do what she did over there.
Right.
Like I think that's what to me amazes me about your story is that you really were doing something and following what you
Hmm.
felt true to you, what felt
Yeah.
honest to you. Um, but but from outward appearances, it's like, okay, what are people going to think? You had brought that up
Yeah.
before. Like, how did you navigate that space of like kind of that fear?
Yeah. I think that fear definitely came up. I will say that I think that my personality has always been, I think my just inherent personality traits were on my side when it came to that, because I've always been, I'm a Enneagram top 4. So the individualist. I actually like being different. So like if everybody else is doing a certain thing and everybody's jumping on the bandwagon, I'm like, I don't want to do that. What can I do that's different? So I've always been that way. So that part of me, I think, is what allowed me to kind of take that step. But that doesn't mean that I didn't have any concerns about what, I mean, we're human. So I was concerned about what other people would think. But that desire to, first of all, just to do what I knew was right for myself, and to like, well, screw this. I'm going to leave medicine because I can. I kind of like being a bit of a quiet rebel. It's just in my personality. So I think that kind of won out, thankfully. I feel like that depending on your personality type, that might be more of a struggle for some people.
I could see that definitely. But if you're somebody that's identified since a young age of like, yeah, I kind of do my own thing and I
Hmm.
like that, you kind of have that to draw back on.
Hmm.
Um, how did you know that interior design was the right path for you? Because I have, coaching for many years is like sort of
Yeah.
sometimes that fear comes up of like, well, what if that's not right for me? I just left this thing I put a
Hmm.
lot of time and energy in. How did you get a sense that that was a good
Yeah.
direction for you?
I don't know that I knew for sure that it was. I just wanted to find out. Like, I loved it so much. I knew I wanted to do it. Like, I didn't know what the future was going to look like with it. Thankfully, I mean, I was very privileged in the fact that I had a husband um, who had a great position. So I didn't have to work. And I understand not everybody's in that situation. So it was definitely a privilege that I started out with. Like, I could explore my interest without having to make money right away. Um, so I first discovered my interest when I was probably in med school residency, and that show on HGTV came out called Trading
Oh
Spaces.
yeah.
I'm dating myself. And because growing up, I wasn't really exposed to interior design. Like, I don't even think I realized it was like a thing until, HGTV was a thing and I started seeing it on TV. And so I remember watching that show and just, I was like, oh my gosh, like I want to do that so badly. I just fell in love with it. And so I watched that show. I was constantly like experimenting in our own home, redoing things. And I just knew. I was like, that's what I want to try. And so I think it was in residency when I was going through probably in retrospect, I was probably pretty depressed at the time and didn't really realize it. But I remember getting online and searching for like the nearest accredited interior design program and what would it be like if I went back and took these classes. And I was like reading the descriptions of the classes and I would get so excited, but it was just like a fantasy at that point because I didn't think that was even an option. um, and so when that time came when I kind of took those baby steps and leaving medicine and then it was at home with my kids, um, and I had there, I was at home with them for a while. And then, some of my time freed up when they were in school where I could go back myself to school. And I was like, this is it. I'm going to do it.
Well, that, and it doesn't sound maybe like you had that when you kind of went in the path of medicine, like
Mm-mm.
oh, this is it. This is kind of like more of a calling kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for sure. And, yeah, and when I decided to go into medicine, it was just, well, yeah, I don't even remember my 18-year-old brain and what I was thinking.
I hear you on that though. I remember just at the time thinking like, being 18 and being like, really? Like you have to pick one thing for the rest of your life? That's like
Yeah.
a lot of pressure on humans.
Yeah. I think the other thing is this thought that we've all held for so long, is like you pick your one thing when you're 18 and then you're not supposed to change.
Mm.
This perception that like you pick your career and then you get a job in whatever related to whatever field or degree that you have, and that's kind of what you stick with for your whole life. And I think that now things have changed in that, like, we're realizing, I think just as a society, that it doesn't have to be that way. Like, what am I, is it really reasonable to have an 18-year-old decide what they're going to do for the rest of their life? And maybe the question is, what am I going to do during this season of my life?
Mm.
And it's okay to change.
I like that idea. Actually, I've been having conversations with a friend for the last couple of weeks about talking about seasons of life.
Mm,
And, when you can really think about it that way, then it opens up so many options for you. If it's not just like, well, this is my career path until I retire or whatever. Um, but if it's a season of life, then it doesn't have to be like, oh, medicine was wrong and now this is right. It's just
right.
in that season of your life that made sense. And now this
Yeah.
makes sense.
Hmm. I think a lot of people too struggle with, and I struggled with this at the time. Am I going to be able to do it? Because I was always artistic and creative, but when I would initially try out different things in my home or pick a paint color or experiment with my home, looking back at it, I didn't have a whole lot of natural ability in that
Mm.
area, and that's why I decided to go back and get my degree so I could learn. And I think that a lot of people who may be unhappy in their position, or I hear a lot of physicians say, well, if I didn't do medicine, I don't have any other skills. What would I do? Um, and I actually recently came across a girl that I was working out with in a local workout class. And she's younger. She's probably in her early 20s. And she was a nurse and thinking about like what are some other things that she could do. And her comment made me realize something. She said, well, I only know how to be a nurse. Like it would be really cool to like start my own business or be an entrepreneur, but like that's off the table because I don't know how to do it. And so I think a lot of people discount a lot of different areas maybe that they're interested in just because they don't have the skill set, and they don't consider the thought that like you can learn. And I told her, I was like, I didn't know it either. If that's what you want to do, it's okay that you don't have the skills. You can learn the skills. So I think that opens up a whole huge opportunity. If when people aren't happy in their job, thinking about, what are the other things that I can do? It doesn't have to be something that I'm already good at.
Oh, absolutely. And what I think too is um, when somebody takes a path that's very clear cut, like, okay, I go to this and I do this schooling, and then after that, I get this type of job.
Hmm.
Doing something, say, for example, what you've done and like becoming an entrepreneur, there's no like roadmap. There's no
Mm-mm.
roadmap for you to do what you did.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Not at
I
all.
think that's part of the scary thing too, is just like, and I've this has definitely come up with a lot of the physicians I've coached throughout the years, is just kind of like, um, there's almost even a fear dreaming of what else you would
Yeah.
do. Like,
Yeah, for sure. Because the
yeah.
path in medicine, and I think it's probably the same in nursing and other healthcare fields, is every that whole path is outlined for you. You know, you go to school, you take this test, you do a residency, you take step 2 and step 3 of the boards, then you do a fellowship or not, and then you take your boards, and then you get a job. So everything's there's not a significant amount of uncertainty involved in that. You know that if you work hard and you go through the process, you're going to get to the next step, and you know exactly what to do next. Whereas, pretty much anything else, especially being an entrepreneur, like you say, there's no roadmap at all. You have to, you get to create that. That for me, and I think this is back to just being a personality thing, that for me was very exciting because like I said, top 4 individualist. I don't like people telling me what to do. So I get to create my own path, and that experience of creating my own path and anything I want to do was very, very attractive to me.
Mm. Well, and I think too, and like as I have conversations with other people like on this podcast, I think what I'm hearing over and over again is this like going towards your strength, right? Like some people I think are just like, whatever, I'm a risk taker and like I feel comfortable taking a risk. And like from what I'm hearing you saying is just like, you know what, I like carving my own path and that attracts me to that direction. And so I
Yes.
don't think there's any one type of person that does like the unconventional thing. I think it's just when you can take and create space for yourself to actually listen to
Hmm.
yourself and see like what you're drawn to. I think we're
Yeah.
naturally drawn in a direction that suits us if we're
Hmm.
willing to like follow that intuition, if we're willing to go to it.
Yeah, we have those desires for a reason, I think, those interests. So yeah, I totally agree.
How do you navigate that trial and error or doing things that like maybe we think of initially as failure or a mistake?
Yeah, that's probably been one of the hardest lessons that I've had to learn throughout the whole process of being an entrepreneur, because you know, I was always very much a perfectionist, very afraid of failing. I tell a story where I was in a couple of pageants when I was in high school. I wasn't like a full blown Southern pageant girl, so don't get the wrong impression. But I was in a couple, I'll admit, and I would not enter a pageant unless I was really, I don't know what criteria I was using, in that, like my 17-year-old brain. But if I didn't think I could win, at least the talent portion, that was the most important to me, or the overall thing, then I wouldn't enter, because
Mm.
I was just like, I wanted, whatever I did, I wanted to win. So I had this very competitive, perfectionistic attitude. And I had that all the way through, college, med school. I wanted to score the highest. I was like third in my class, I think. Like I was just very performance driven, because in retrospect, that's how I was getting my feeling of value. That's what I was
Mm.
looking for, that validation. And so when I started on, this entrepreneurial journey, and got a lot of coaching, a lot of business coaching, and everyone was telling me you have to be willing to fail. And it was funny because when I first started, I thought, well, I'm going to create this design/coaching program. And I spent all this time on it. And I was like, I'm just going to put it out into the world, and it's going to work, and everybody's going to sign up, and that's going to be it. It's just going to
Mm.
run. And and that is not at all what happened. I had lots of offers and things that totally failed. And I got through that just kind of step by step with coaching. And finally, I mean, it took me a long time to really be okay with failing,
Mm.
and not view that as like I'm not worthy, or something's wrong with me. And look at it, what helped is thinking about it more like just in a scientific way, like this is an experiment, and I'm just trying different things, and I'm getting data, and I'm going to figure out like what works and what doesn't. And now if I have a launch that doesn't go if I don't meet my goal, or it doesn't go as in the way that I expected, I don't think that there's anything wrong with me. I'm just like, okay, well, let's figure out what's wrong and pivot and try something else. So
Yeah.
that's just being willing to fail over and over has been the hardest thing, but it's also, I think, been the most rewarding because if you're willing to fail and you're not making it mean that there's something wrong with you, you really kind of open yourself up to be able to try anything that you want.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that because I think that is like almost at the crux of the thing that comes up for everyone. But just like, okay,
Yeah.
what if I try and fail?
Yeah.
I imagine that you have probably other people coming to you just being like, okay, I want to leave medicine or leave my career and change. Like, what are the things that come up in those conversations when people ask you about like how you did it yourself?
I think a lot of it boils down to, there's always that uncertainty. And I think that people, before they make that decision, it's like they want to be certain that it's going to work out. And then they want to be certain that they're making the right decision. And so, what I always say is, you get to decide if it's the right decision or not, right? And that there's probably not a right or wrong decision. It's just, what do you want? And then, and just being able to be okay with not being certain that everything's going to work out, but being confident that you're going to be okay no matter which way it goes,
Yeah.
that you can fail and then recover and grow from it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely one of the biggest things that comes up because it's
Hmm.
like, we will never be certain. I mean, I
No,
know just like on a daily
never.
basis, it's just like, oh my gosh. And I think that's been, if anybody's learned anything over the last several years, it's just like what really intense uncertainty feels like in the world. And I do think that contributes a lot to hearing people branching out and doing different things in their life. You're like, well, if we can get through COVID and all that
Yeah,
uncertainty, like maybe there's a different path for
exactly.
me.
Yeah, yeah.
What advice would you give beyond that to somebody who is thinking about making like a major career shift like you
Hmm.
did?
I would say be brutally honest with yourself about what you want. And even if you think that you don't know, you probably do deep down, at least to some degree, in some general sense. But be brutally honest about it. Like, because I think that's where so many of us, myself included, we're always thinking about like the other people and society and like what other people are going to think. So just be brutally honest about what you want and realize that it sounds really cliche and so like toxic positivity, you say like you can do anything you want, but um if you're really aware of what your mindset is going into it, you really can, if there's something that you don't know, you can learn it. If you fail, you're going to be okay. But kind of circling back around, I think the most important thing is just be really honest with yourself about what you want. Because I thought I was being honest with myself when I said I wanted to go into medicine, but I really wasn't in the back of my mind. And I knew it at the time. Now that I'm, a lot older, I think there was a part of me that knew like, you're just doing this because it's a challenge. It's so easy to ignore that. So just be honest with yourself.
Yeah. And I also get a sense from your story is that you were honest with yourself, but it wasn't like, and now I have to go fix this or do something about it tomorrow. It seemed like it was honest, and maybe I'm getting this wrong, but like, okay, now I'm going to I'm going to explore these new ideas that I'm having. Like, I'm going
Yeah.
to, and I think that's one thing that scares people is like, if I
Mhm.
am truly honest with myself, then I have to make these big, scary changes immediately.
Once I had the realization that I really wanted that interior design was my passion and that's what I wanted to do, it was probably 7 or 8 years before I ended up doing that. So you don't have to change everything right away, but just that awareness and being honest with yourself. Honestly, it even helped I was going through a lot of depression and anxiety at the time. It even helped that. I think just being honest with myself about what I wanted. So you don't have to be in a rush. You have plenty of time.
Yeah, plenty of time. I mean,
Hmm.
7 or 8 years, like,
Hmm.
it's like that is a good span of time to make
Yeah.
that transition.
Yeah. Cause I was what, 35 I was 35 when I decided to leave medicine,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of us like, well, 35, I mean, you should be like in your career and advancing and everything. And I just was starting over. But now and I could have let the time factor come into play, but now here I am 49 and I wouldn't have had it any other way. I mean, that time was going to go by anyway. It's totally fine. You can, I always tell people like that come to me there that are in their 40s or 50s, and I'm like, it's never too late to pivot if it's really what you want to do.
Yeah. And it might be the perfect time to actually do that because,
Yeah.
yeah, because it's like, could I do now what I'm doing now when I was like 22 years old?
Right.
No. Like I
Yeah.
needed everything up until now to like figure this out. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
I
and it
think
will be
about that
tricky.
sometimes in relation to what I've done. I'm like, would I be where I'm at now had I not gone to medical school and practiced and everything? Because that changed me in, so many ways and made me stronger in different areas. I wouldn't be working with other women physicians right now. So I think that was just a part of my path.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like it still comes up in all of these different ways that you just couldn't
Hmm.
have expected in med school, like at
Yeah, yeah,
all.
for sure.
Yeah. Is there anything else on your mind as we wrap up the conversation today?
I think that one thing that actually does come up is that when I started, my business about 3 years ago, and still I find myself having these types of thoughts that at some point it's just going to be easy, and at some
Mm.
point, like, I'll get it. In terms of my business, and I've realized that that's never going to be the case. Like it's always a series, especially if you own your own business, of changes and adjusting and pivoting. And so I'm learning to enjoy that part of the process instead of thinking that one day I will have arrived and that'll be it. You know,
Yeah.
there are always going to be challenges. Otherwise, we're not going to keep growing. So,
And I would say that's not exclusive to just business. I'm just like
right.
thinking, I'm like, oh, yeah, we think like, oh, I definitely had that thought at 30 and then 40. I'm like, oh, I
I
should have
know.
this figured out by now. It's like,
I
mm.
know. Yeah. Even now, I'm like, oh, when I'm, 60, all this will be like rolling. And I just know that it's just going to be, the issues I have now won't be the same, but they'll be different, and that's okay.
Yeah. I have, I think, finally embraced that, like, oh, and I don't want it to be like that I have arrived because how boring would that be at that
Boring. I
point?
know. I know. Totally boring. If you have no challenges or, I'm like, what am I going to do all day? Just sit around and binge Netflix, which sometimes
Right.
sounds nice, but,
I know. I think about that too. I'm like, yeah, that's good for about 2 days. And then it's like, all right, what's next? So,
yeah, exactly.
well, Krisha, if somebody wanted to find you online, where would they go looking?
They can find me on social media. Instagram, my handle is at Kricia Palmer MD. That's KRICIAPALMERMD. And they can also check out my website at housecallsforphysicians.com.
Amazing. And I'll have that all linked in the show notes below. So, well, thank you so much, Krisha, for coming on today. I have loved our conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Hey, friend, thank you for listening to today's conversation with Kricia Palmer. If you are considering a major career or lifestyle change and you want to talk to somebody about this, I am here for you. You can learn how to work with me one-on-one on my website, lynngrogan.com, and I also have details in the show notes. See you next time.